Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. I want to begin tonight with a sentence that shook the world of science and religion alike. A sentence written by one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century, a man who spent decades staring into black holes and the birth of the universe itself. Stephen Hawking wrote, "Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Philosophy is dead," he told us. God is not necessary. Physics has closed the case. Now, when I first read that sentence, I did something rather unusual for a mathematician. I laughed. Not because Hawking wasn't brilliant. He was one of the finest scientific minds of our generation. And I mean that with complete sincerity. But because that sentence, ladies and gentlemen, contains one of the most extraordinary logical errors I have encountered in 40 years of studying the interface between science and faith. And tonight, I want to show you exactly where it goes wrong. But I promise you this, by the end of this evening, you will never read that sentence the same way again. Because hidden inside those 17 words is a magic trick, a sleight of hand so subtle that most people, including some very intelligent people, never catch it. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So stay with me, because we're going to walk through black holes. We're going to talk about nothing, literally nothing, and we're going to ask a question that Hawking himself, to his credit, spent his entire career trying to answer. Why is there something rather than nothing at all? Let me take you back to 2010. Stephen Hawking, along with physicist Leonard Mlodinow, published a book called The Grand Design. It made headlines around the world. The Times of London ran the story on its front page. The opening lines of that book declared that philosophy is dead. And then, in a delicious irony that I have pointed out on more than one occasion, proceeded to do philosophy for the next 200 pages. You cannot tell me philosophy is dead and then spend your entire book making philosophical arguments about the nature of reality, causation and existence. That's a bit like a man sawing off the very branch he's sitting on and being surprised when he hits the ground. But let's be fair to Hawking. His central argument deserves serious engagement, not dismissal. Here is what he was really saying. Because there is a law of gravity. Because space itself can, according to quantum theory, spontaneously produce virtual particles. The universe does not need a divine cause. It can, in a sense, bootstrap itself into existence. Gravity plus quantum fluctuation equals universe. No God required. Now here is my first question for you tonight. And I want you to really sit with it. Where did the law of gravity come from? You see, Hawking's argument assumes gravity already exists. It assumes quantum mechanics already exists. It assumes space. A place for those fluctuations to happen already exists. In other words, his explanation for how something comes from nothing already smuggles in something. A great deal of something, actually. The laws of physics themselves are not nothing. They are highly specific, mathematically precise, extraordinarily fine-tuned realities. And you cannot use a law of physics to explain why there are laws of physics in the first place, any more than you can use the rules of chess to explain why the chessboard exists at all. This is not a minor quibble, ladies and gentlemen. This is the entire ball game. When I debated this very question, and I've had the privilege of doing so in various forums, from Oxford to the pages of published dialogue, I put it rather directly. I said, for this argument to work, nothing must mean nothing, not a quantum vacuum, not a state of low energy, not curved space-time. Nothing means the absence of anything whatsoever. No laws, no particles, no energy, no space, no time. And the moment gravity is present, we are no longer talking about nothing. We are talking about something remarkably rich and structured. Physicist Lawrence Krauss actually wrote an entire book called A Universe from Nothing, making a very similar move. And I remember reading it and thinking, the nothing in this book is not nothing. It is quantum foam. It is fields. It is the vacuum of space, which, and this is worth remembering, is actually something physicists can describe mathematically, measure and calculate. That's not nothing. That's an awful lot of somethings dressed up in a very convincing costume. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting, and this is where I want you to lean in a little closer. Because there is a second, deeper question hiding underneath all of this. Even if we grant, for the sake of argument, that quantum laws could somehow produce particles from a vacuum, where, might I ask, did the laws themselves come from? Laws don't create themselves. Laws describe how something behaves. A law of gravity is not a thing that exists independently, floating in some cosmic filing cabinet waiting to switch itself on. A law is a description of the regular behavior of something that already exists. To say that the law of gravity created the universe is a category mistake of the highest order. It's like saying the laws of aerodynamics created the airplane. No. Engineers created the airplane using their understanding of the laws of aerodynamics. The laws describe, they do not create. Only agents create. And this, my friends, is precisely where I believe the biblical worldview offers something the purely materialist worldview cannot. Genesis chapter 1 does not begin with, in the beginning were the laws of physics. It begins with, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. An agent, a mind, a cause with the power and the intention to bring something into being. And here's what fascinates me as a mathematician. The very fact that the universe operates according to elegant, discoverable mathematical laws is itself something that cries out for explanation. Why should the universe be rationally intelligible at all? Why should it be describable in the language of mathematics with such breathtaking precision that we can send a spacecraft to Pluto and have it arrive within seconds of the predicted time? Sir Isaac Newton, a man rather more accomplished in physics than most of us in this room, did not see a conflict here. He saw a magnificent design pointing to a designer. Einstein himself, though not a traditional theist, said that the eternal mystery of the universe is its comprehensibility, and he called that fact a miracle. Eugene Wigner, the Nobel laureate physicist, wrote a famous paper on what he called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. Unreasonable. That's his word, not mine. He was staring at the same puzzle I'm describing to you tonight and admitting that naturalism alone doesn't obviously explain why abstract mathematics should map so perfectly onto physical reality. Now, let me bring in another thread, because I promised you curiosity, and I intend to deliver on that promise. Let's talk about black holes for a moment. Hawking's great specialty, the subject that made him famous in the first place. Hawking showed us that black holes are not entirely black. They radiate. They leak energy in the form of what we now call Hawking radiation. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of theoretical physics of the last century, connecting general relativity, quantum mechanics, and thermodynamics in one elegant stroke. I have enormous respect for that achievement. But here's the question I want to put to you. Does understanding how a black hole radiates energy tell us anything at all about why there is a universe with black holes? Physics and radiation to begin with? Of course not. Explaining the mechanism of something is not the same as explaining its existence. A biologist can explain in extraordinary detail how a car engine, no wait. Let me use a better illustration. A mechanic can explain in extraordinary detail how a car engine works. Every valve, every piston, every spark. But that explanation, however complete, tells you absolutely nothing about who designed the engine, who built the factory, or why the car exists in the first place. Mechanism is not the same as meaning. Process is not the same as purpose. This is the fundamental confusion, I believe, at the heart of Hawking's argument, and frankly, at the heart of a great deal of popular scientific atheism. It conflates two entirely different kinds of questions. The how questions, which science is superbly equipped to answer, and the why questions, which require a different kind of reasoning altogether. I like to put it this way: science and religion are not, contrary to popular belief, competitors answering the same question. They are complementary, answering different questions. Science can tell you how the kettle on the stove is boiling, the physics of heat transfer, the properties of water molecules, the conductivity of the metal. But if you ask why the kettle is boiling, and someone answers, because I want a cup of tea, that is not a rival explanation to the scientific one. It's a different level of explanation entirely. Both are true simultaneously. And I would suggest to you tonight that the existence of the universe deserves both kinds of answers. The how, which physics is unpacking with astonishing success, and the why, which points us toward a mind behind it all. Now, some of you might be thinking, Professor Lennox, this all sounds terribly reasonable, But wasn't Hawking simply following the evidence, being the good empirical scientist, while religious people are simply clinging to ancient texts? I want to address that head on because it is, frankly, one of the great myths of our age. The myth that science and faith are natural enemies locked in perpetual warfare. Consider this. The scientific revolution itself, Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, Boyle, Faraday, Maxwell, was overwhelmingly populated by men who believed the universe was created by a rational God, and who believed that because God is rational, the universe he made would be rationally comprehensible and therefore worth investigating. Johannes Kepler famously said he was thinking God's thoughts after him. That is not the language of a man who saw faith and science in conflict. That is the language of a man whose faith fueled his science. The historian of science, Peter Harrison, and others have made this case extensively. The birth of modern science in 17th century Europe was not despite the Christian worldview, but arguably because of it. The belief in an orderly creator gave early scientists confidence that nature would follow orderly, discoverable laws. So when Hawking or Dawkins or others present the conflict between God and science as though it was simply obvious and settled, I want you to remember some of the greatest scientific minds in history saw no such conflict. Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project, is a Christian. Georges Lemaître, the Belgian priest who first proposed what we now call the Big Bang Theory. Yes, a Catholic priest gave us the Big Bang, was both a scientist and a man of deep faith. John Polkinghorne, a quantum physicist at Cambridge, left academic physics to become an Anglican priest and spent the rest of his life writing about the harmony between science and Christian belief. These are not fringe figures. These are serious minds who looked at exactly the same data as Hawking and drew a very different conclusion. Let me push a little further into the heart of Hawking's worldview, because there's something else worth examining: his treatment of the fine-tuning of the universe. Hawking himself acknowledged quite openly that the physical constants of our universe appear to be extraordinarily finely tuned for the existence of life. The strength of gravity, the cosmological constant, the ratio of electromagnetic force to gravitational force. These values sit within margins so narrow that physicists have compared it to hitting a target the size of one atom from across the entire observable universe. Hawking's own response to this was to invoke the multiverse, the idea that there might be an infinite or near infinite number of universes, each with different physical constants, and we simply happen to exist in the one universe compatible with life. Because, well, where else would observers like us exist? Now, I find this move fascinating because notice what has happened here philosophically. In order to avoid the conclusion of a designer, we are asked to believe in the existence of an unimaginably vast number of universes. Universes, mind you, that are by definition unobservable, untestable and unfalsifiable, existing entirely outside any possible scientific verification. And I want you to sit with the irony of that for a moment. A worldview that prides itself on empirical rigor, on only believing what can be tested and observed, resolves its greatest philosophical difficulty by appealing to something that can never, even in principle, be tested or observed. As I've said in more than one public exchange, that requires a rather substantial leap of faith, arguably a larger leap than believing in a creator, because at least the concept of a creator has been the near universal intuition of human civilizations across every continent and every century of recorded history. The multiverse, by contrast, is a mathematical possibility invented in significant part to avoid a conclusion some scientists find uncomfortable. I am not saying the multiverse hypothesis is necessarily false. I am saying it is not a slam dunk scientific alternative to design. It is itself a metaphysical commitment, dressed in the language of physics. Now, let me bring us toward the emotional core of this, because I think it matters enormously, and I don't want tonight to feel like a purely academic exercise. Stephen Hawking lived with motor neuron disease for over 50 years, a condition that was expected to kill him within a few years of diagnosis when he was just 21 years old. He defied the odds in the most extraordinary way, producing groundbreaking work while trapped, quite literally, inside a body that betrayed him more and more with each passing decade. I have deep, genuine compassion for that struggle, and I understand on a human level why a man who endured that kind of suffering might resist the idea of a personal God who could have prevented it. That is not a scientific objection. That is a deeply human one, and it deserves to be treated with far more grace than mockery. But here is what I would gently say in response. The Christian faith does not promise a universe free of suffering. It promises something rather different. A God who enters into suffering with us. The central image of Christianity is not a distant deity watching from a comfortable throne. It is a cross. It is God in Christ entering into the worst that suffering and death can offer and defeating it from the inside. That is a very different picture from the caricature of religion that Hawking and many like him often attacked. The idea of God as a cosmic tyrant, an unnecessary hypothesis competing with science for the same explanatory space. The God of the Bible is not a rival to the law of gravity. He is the reason there is a law of gravity to discover in the first place. And he is the one who, according to the Christian claim, entered our world of suffering to redeem it. So where does this leave us? I want to close with the very sentence I opened with. Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. We have seen tonight that this sentence, for all its scientific packaging, does not actually explain existence. It presupposes it. It borrows gravity, quantum law, space, and mathematical structure, and then claims to have produced something from nothing, when in fact it has smuggled in almost everything required to answer the question, and simply declined to ask where that almost everything came from. The question Leibniz asked centuries ago remains, I believe, the most important question any human being can ask. Why is there something rather than nothing? Not how does something behave once it exists. Physics answers that beautifully, and I have no quarrel with it whatsoever. I have devoted my life to mathematics precisely because I find the intelligibility of the universe so thrilling. But why does the universe exist at all? Structured, ordered, rational, fine-tuned, comprehensible to creatures like us who can remarkably look out from a small planet orbiting an ordinary star and reconstruct the first fractions of a second after its beginning. I do not believe blind, unguided physical law is a sufficient answer to that question. I believe the evidence, the fine-tuning, the mathematical intelligibility, the very existence of law itself points beyond the universe to a mind capable of conceiving it.